Hello and welcome to Life Diary. My name is Mikhailu. If you enjoy real-life stories that feel honest and emotional, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Hello, my name is Michael. I'm 30 years old, and I work as an electrician. I live alone in a small rented apartment on the edge of the city, not far from the industrial area where most of my jobs are. My days usually look the same. Early mornings, long hours, tools in my hands, and quiet evenings when I come home too tired to think much about anything else. That evening started like many others, but it felt heavier. Winter had settled in for real. The kind of cold that bites through your jacket and makes every step feel slower. I had just finished a long shift at a construction site where nothing ever goes as planned. The pay was late again, and the foreman kept promising things would improve next month. I'd heard that before. I walked toward my car, rubbing my hands together, already thinking about the heater and the silence of the drive home. My phone buzzed with a message from my landlord reminding me about the rent. I didn't reply. I just sat in the car for a moment, staring at the steering wheel, trying to shake off the feeling that my life was stuck on repeat. As I drove through a quiet residential street, I noticed a car pulled over near the curb with its hazard lights blinking weakly. At first, I kept going. I was cold, tired, and honestly, I didn't feel like dealing with anyone else's problems. Then I saw her standing outside the car, wrapping her coat tighter around herself, tapping on her phone with bare fingers that were already turning red from the cold. I slowed down. I told myself someone else would stop. Someone always does. But after a few seconds, I pulled over anyway. I don't know why. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was just that I wouldn't have forgiven myself if I hadn't. She looked up, surprised, maybe even a little wary. I kept my distance and asked if she needed help. Her voice shook when she answered. She said the car wouldn't start and her phone battery was almost dead. She had already tried calling roadside assistance, but no one was answering. Her name was Dana. She was 32 and worked as an accountant. She apologized for bothering me even though I had stopped on my own. That alone told me a lot about her. I popped the hood and took a look. The problem was simple enough, something I'd seen dozens of times before, especially in this weather. I explained what I was doing as I worked, partly to reassure her, partly to keep my own hands from freezing. She listened quietly, nodding, trusting me without asking unnecessary questions. When the engine finally turned over, the sound felt louder than it probably was. Dana let out a breath she'd clearly been holding for a while. She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that comes from relief, not happiness. She thanked me more than once, fumbling in her bag as if she was looking for money. I shook my head and told her not to worry about it. I was already closing the hood when she stopped me. She smiled, a little unsure, and said, "Now it's my turn to warm you up with coffee." I almost said no. It would have been easier to go home, sit alone, and forget the whole thing by morning. But something about the way she said it, like it wasn't a line or a plan, just a simple offer, made me pause. There was a small cafe still open around the corner. Nothing special, just warm lights in the windows and the promise of heat. I agreed. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and baked bread. We sat at a small table by the window, our coats still on, hands wrapped around hot cups. At first, we talked about nothing important. The cold, the traffic, how unpredictable winters had become. Slowly, the conversation shifted. Dana mentioned she'd just finished a late day at the office. End-of-year reports, long hours, and pressure that never really stopped. She didn't complain, but I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. When she mentioned she lived alone now, there was a pause she didn't try to explain away. I told her about my job, the physical work, the constant moving from one site to another, and how I'd been doing it for years without really knowing what came next. I surprised myself by how honest I was. I didn't make things sound better than they were. There was no flirting, no dramatic moment, just two tired people warming their hands and talking like it mattered. When we finally stood up to leave, the cafe was almost empty. Outside, the cold felt sharper again. We stood there for a second, unsure how to end the moment. Dana thanked me again, this time more quietly. I told her to drive safe. We went our separate ways. I drove home, turned off the engine, and sat in silence longer than usual. I didn't feel excited. I didn't feel hopeful. But for the first time in a long while, I felt calm. And that was enough. I didn't expect to see Dana again after that evening. Life usually doesn't circle back so neatly. The next few days went by the same way my weeks always did. Work, Cold mornings, tired hands, quiet nights. But something had shifted. I caught myself thinking about that cafe, the way the warmth had felt after standing in the cold, and how easy the conversation had been without trying to impress anyone. 3 days later, I ran into her again. I was at a small grocery store near my apartment, picking up things I'd forgotten to buy twice already. I was standing in line, half distracted, when I heard my name. I turned around, confused, and there she was. Dana. She looked just as surprised as I felt. She laughed first, a short, almost awkward laugh, and said she wasn't sure it was me until she heard my voice asking the cashier about batteries. That broke the tension. We talked for a minute right there in line, blocking the aisle without realizing it. She told me she lived a few streets away from the cafe and sometimes stopped at that store after work. I told her it was the closest place where the lights didn't flicker. Outside, the air was cold again, but not as harsh as that first night. We stood near our cars, bags in our hands, neither of us rushing to leave. This time, the coffee idea didn't feel like a rescue from the cold. It felt like a choice. We went to a different cafe, closer to her place. It was quieter, less cozy, but it didn't matter. The conversation picked up where it had left off, like no time had passed. Dana told me more about her job, how accounting wasn't something she had dreamed of as a child, but had grown into over time. She liked structure. Numbers made sense when people didn't. Eventually, she mentioned her divorce. Not dramatically, not with anger, just as a fact of her life. She said it had been finalized less than a year ago, that the decision had been mutual on paper, but painful in reality. She'd stayed too long trying to fix something that no longer worked. I didn't interrupt. I didn't give advice. I just listened. When she asked about me, I told her the truth. That I'd been working as an electrician since my early 20s. That I was good at it, reliable, but tired. That most days felt like maintenance rather than progress. I admitted that I didn't hate my life, but I didn't feel like I was moving forward either. She nodded like she understood exactly what that meant. After that, our meetings became more frequent, though never dramatic. Short walks after work. Coffee that turned into soup on colder nights. Simple routines. We talked about everyday things. Work frustrations. Family habits. How silence can feel heavy or peaceful depending on who you're with. There were moments of hesitation. Dana kept emotional distance at first. I could feel it. She never said it directly, but I saw how careful she was with her words, how she avoided making plans too far ahead. I didn't push. I had my own walls. Years of living alone teaches you not to expect much from people. One evening, while walking near her street, she stopped suddenly and said she was scared. Not of me, of herself. Of trusting the calm when she had learned to expect disappointment. I told her I didn't need promises. Just honesty. That seemed to matter to her. We didn't label anything. We didn't talk about what we were becoming. We just kept showing up. Slowly, naturally. There were misunderstandings. A message left unanswered too long. A canceled plan because work ran late. But instead of pulling away, we talked. Sometimes awkwardly. Sometimes quietly. Always honestly. One night, after dinner at her place, nothing special, just pasta and tired smiles, she thanked me for being patient. I told her I wasn't waiting for anything. I was just there. Walking home later, I realized something. I wasn't counting hours anymore. I wasn't dreading mornings the same way. Life hadn't changed dramatically, but it felt lighter, more human. By the end of that month, it felt natural to say her name out loud when I thought about the future. Not as a plan, just as a possibility. And for the first time in years, that didn't scare me. What we had didn't change overnight. There was no moment where everything suddenly became clear or easy. Life kept moving at its usual pace, and we moved with it, trying to find where we fit together. By then, seeing Dana had become part of my routine, even if we never officially called it that. Some weeks we met twice, some weeks only once. Sometimes it was just a short walk after work, sometimes dinner at her place or mine. We kept things simple, almost carefully simple, like neither of us wanted to scare the moment away by asking too much of it. Dana was still rebuilding herself. I could see it in the small details. The way she double-checked plans. The way she needed to know when I would arrive and when I would leave. Not because she was controlling, but because uncertainty made her uneasy. After her divorce, she had learned to rely on herself first and everyone else second. I understood that more than I expected. I had spent years doing the same thing, just in a quieter way. Work had been my excuse to avoid thinking about what I wanted. Long hours meant no expectations. No expectations meant no disappointment. There were evenings when Dana seemed distant, lost in thought, answering questions with short replies. I learned not to take it personally. When I asked, she told me honestly that some days still felt heavy, that memories came back without warning, that she sometimes questioned whether she was ready for anything new. I didn't try to fix it. I just stayed. One night, we planned to meet for dinner after my shift. I finished late, later than I'd said. When I checked my phone, I saw her message asking if everything was okay. I replied too briefly, distracted and tired. By the time I arrived, she was quiet, clearly hurt. In the past, I might have brushed it off or left early. Instead, I told her the truth. That work had run long, that I should have explained better, that I didn't want her to feel ignored. It wasn't a dramatic conversation, just two adults sitting across from each other, trying not to repeat old mistakes. She told me that in her marriage, silence had always meant distance, that unanswered messages made her feel unimportant. Hearing that changed the way I saw things. I realized how easily small habits could reopen old wounds. From then on, we paid more attention. Not perfectly, but deliberately. As weeks passed, something steady began to form between us. It wasn't excitement or passion. It was trust. We started planning small things together. A weekend market. A short trip to a nearby town. Nothing that couldn't be canceled if needed, but enough to acknowledge that we were choosing each other. Dana told me more about her life before. About how she had lost herself trying to keep her marriage intact. How she had ignored signs that things were falling apart because she was afraid of starting over in her 30s. Saying it out loud seemed to help her let go of the guilt she still carried. I shared things too. How my parents had divorced when I was young. How I'd learned early not to depend too much on anyone. How that mindset had followed me into adulthood, shaping my relationships without me realizing it. There was one evening that stood out. We were walking through a park near her place, the air cold but calm. She stopped and looked at me seriously and asked what I wanted. Not from her. From life. The question caught me off guard. I didn't have a clear answer. I told her that I wanted stability. Meaning. To feel like my work mattered. To come home to something that felt like mine, not just a place to sleep. Saying it out loud made it feel more real, more possible. She smiled then, not brightly, but warmly. Like she saw something in me that I hadn't fully seen myself. Still, there were moments when both of us almost stepped back. When the comfort felt unfamiliar enough to be frightening. Dana once admitted she had considered pulling away simply because things felt too calm. I told her I had thought the same. Instead of letting fear decide, we talked. We chose to stay curious rather than defensive. By the end of that season, our lives were quietly intertwining. I had a toothbrush at her place. She knew which mornings I needed silence. I helped her fix small things around her apartment, and she reminded me to rest when work consumed me. Nothing was perfect, but it was honest. And somehow, that made all the difference. By the time spring arrived, our lives were no longer separate lines that happened to cross now and then. They were running alongside each other, close enough that changes in one affected the other. Not dramatically, not loudly, but in ways that mattered. The first real test came quietly. My company lost a contract I had been counting on. Nothing sudden, no firing, just fewer hours and uncertainty that stretched week by week. I told myself it was temporary, but I felt the familiar tension return. That old instinct to close in on myself, to carry it alone, to not burden anyone else. For a few days, I said nothing to Dana. I worked extra shifts when I could and pretended everything was fine. She noticed anyway. One evening, while we were making dinner at my place, she asked why I seemed distant. I tried to brush it off. She didn't push, but she didn't let it go either. Later that night, sitting on the couch with the lights low, I told her the truth. About the lost contract. About the hours. About the fear that came with not knowing what came next. She didn't panic. She didn't try to solve it for me. She listened, then asked simple questions. How long it might last. What options I had. Whether I'd thought about applying elsewhere. It was practical, grounded, and unexpectedly comforting. A week later, Dana came home with news of her own. Her company had offered her a promotion. Better pay. More responsibility. The catch was that it would require moving to another city, about an hour away. Not across the country. Not unreachable. But far enough to change things. She was torn. I could see it in the way she spoke, carefully weighing each word. She said she had worked towards something like this for years, and turning it down felt like stepping backward. At the same time, She had just begun to feel settled. Safe. I told her I needed time to think. Not because I was angry or afraid of losing her, but because I wanted to be honest with myself before answering. That night, lying alone, I realized something uncomfortable. Part of me wanted to ask her to stay, not because it was best for her, but because it was easier for me. The next day, we talked again. I told her that her career mattered, that she shouldn't shape her future around my uncertainty, that we could figure things out if she wanted to try. Saying it out loud felt like choosing growth over comfort, and it scared me more than I expected. She cried, not because of sadness, but relief. In the end, Dana accepted the position, but negotiated partial remote work. She would commute a few days a week and keep her apartment for the time being. It wasn't perfect, but it was realistic. It was us choosing to adjust instead of running. During that same period, I applied for a position I had been avoiding for months. Better pay, more responsibility, and a leadership role that intimidated me. I doubted myself constantly, convinced I wasn't ready. Dana reminded me of things I had forgotten about myself. My reliability, my skill, the way people trusted me without hesitation. When I got the offer, I didn't celebrate loudly. I just sat quietly for a long time, letting the weight of it settle. For once, progress didn't feel like pressure. It felt earned. We spent more nights together after that. Not because we needed reassurance, but because it made sense. We talked about practical things. Schedules, money, expectations. Topics that used to feel heavy now felt necessary. There were still moments of doubt. Mornings when Dana left early for the train, and I felt the space beside me. Evenings when work drained me more than usual, and I questioned whether I could keep up. But instead of pulling away, we checked in. Short messages, honest updates, simple reassurance. One night, standing in her kitchen, Dana admitted she had once believed love had to be dramatic to be real. That calm scared her more than chaos ever had. I told her I used to think stability meant boredom, that maybe we were both unlearning things we never meant to carry this long. By the end of that year, our lives were no longer divided into mine and hers. We talked about moving in together, not as a romantic milestone, but as a practical step. It felt natural, like the next logical chapter, not a leap into the unknown. Choosing each other didn't mean everything became easy. It meant we stopped using difficulty as a reason to walk away. And for the first time, neither of us was escaping. Life didn't change all at once. It settled. By the time we decided to move in together, it didn't feel like a big announcement or a test of feelings. It felt practical. Dana's commute schedule had stabilized, and my new position came with regular hours for the first time in years. We spent most nights together anyway, switching apartments out of convenience more than romance. One evening, while sorting groceries in my kitchen, Dana said we were wasting time pretending we lived separately. She was right. We chose her place. It was brighter, closer to the train, and already felt shared. We made lists, divided expenses, talked through routines. Who woke up first? Who needed silence in the morning? What weekends usually looked like? None of it was exciting, but all of it mattered. Living together brought new challenges, the quiet kind that don't show up in stories unless you're paying attention. Learning each other's rhythms. Accepting habits that weren't charming. Dana liked things planned. I liked flexibility. She organized bills weeks ahead. I handled problems as they appeared. We argued sometimes. Not loudly, but firmly. Then we learned how to stop before things hardened into distance. There were moments when old fears surfaced. Dana worried about repeating past mistakes. I worried about losing myself inside responsibility. Instead of pretending those thoughts didn't exist, we said them out loud. That alone changed everything. Months passed. Seasons shifted. The apartment slowly filled with shared objects. Tools in the hallway closet. Her books on my shelf. A routine of coffee in the morning that became hours without discussion. We stopped asking if the other was coming home late. We already knew. When Dana told me she was pregnant, she didn't make it dramatic. She sat next to me on the couch and placed my hand over hers. I understood before she said a word. My first reaction wasn't excitement or fear. It was stillness, a deep awareness that life had moved into a new shape. We talked for hours that night. About timing, about money, about what kind of parents we wanted to be. There was fear, of course, but it wasn't overwhelming. It felt grounded, like something we could handle together. Preparing for the baby was practical and slow. Doctor appointments, rearranging rooms, conversations about responsibilities. Dana remained calm, focused. I learned patience I didn't know I had. I took fewer overtime shifts. I came home earlier. The future stopped feeling abstract. On a cold winter morning, almost exactly a year after we first met, we were driving through the same neighborhood where it had all started. Dana was pregnant enough to move carefully, holding her coat closed against the cold. As we turned a corner, we saw a car pulled over with hazard lights blinking weakly. I slowed down without thinking. A woman stood by the hood, phone in hand, clearly frustrated and cold. Dana looked at me and smiled before I even asked. I pulled over. The problem was familiar. Simple. I worked quickly while Dana waited nearby, holding 2 cups of coffee she had just bought from a small stand down the street. When the engine started, the woman thanked us repeatedly, relief written all over her face. As we walked back to our car, Dana handed me one of the cups. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. That moment stayed with me. Our child was born in early spring. Healthy, loud, perfect in the way only real things are. Holding my son for the first time didn't feel like a movie scene. It felt heavy and real and grounding, like standing exactly where I was supposed to be. Life after that was busy and imperfect. Sleepless nights, adjustments, new fears, but also laughter, quiet mornings, a sense of purpose that didn't fade when work ended. Years later, our routine still looked simple. Work, home, family dinners, coffee together when the house was quiet. Dana continued her career, steady and confident. I found satisfaction in my work without letting it consume me. Sometimes, on cold evenings, I think back to that night when I almost didn't stop. Helping a stranger start her car wasn't a heroic act. It was small, ordinary, but it led me to a life that felt warm in ways I hadn't known I needed. And that was how it ended. If this story touched you, please support the channel, subscribe to Life Diary, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps these real-life stories reach more people.